Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Good Times Hour. Okay, Paul, take it away.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world, please welcome to the tea our next guest. He's the world-class Frisbee blaster and good vibes and better jam master. The FPA founder and Hall of Famer whose name is held in honor all across the globe among the Shred Now jammers. In the heydays and early plays of the FPA, he was strong, gifted, athletic, and charismatic. His style was classic and smooth, and virtually any move to landing he could stick. He started in Rochester and got his first glimpse of the best of the world at the AFDO, and he was hooked for life to play this sport with no strife, and he learned swiftly how to master freestyle and put on a great show. He's a man of deep faith and lifetime achievement, a true jammer and a man of manners with a mission and a passion for spreading the love around the block and around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome, joining us from Hillsborough, North Carolina, Dave Marini.
Woo. Wow, what an opening.
Right on. Well, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Joining us. Let's just jump right into it. We're gonna kind of come at you from a couple of different angles to start, but Mace, why don't you start right into it?
All right, so we've already got a glimpse of your PDGA story because we interviewed your wife earlier this year. So we know that you got number 302 from the Craig Meyer inaugural PDGA event,
Right.
but the record doesn't show how you finished. How did you finish? Do you remember?
Probably not great. Golf was not my thing. I went to these events because in those days everyone played everything, but my heart was freestyle from the beginning.
Right on, from the very beginning. Was there any other of the individual overall events that you liked a lot, or was it just pretty much freestyle for you?
No, actually, MTA and TRC, I had some success with. In fact, I held the world record for TRC for about 1 week during 1978, I believe. I set that record at Huntsville, Alabama tournament, and I loved MTA and TRC. But other than that, I pretty much was focused on freestyle.
Okay.
So the PDGA records say that you only played 3 disc golf events. Is that true?
Probably
a few others, correct?
PGA events. Yeah, that would probably be true. Now, there were a lot of golf events in the North American Series tournaments back in 75, 76, 77 that I probably played in, but they weren't sanctioned TDGA events. That came along a little later. And by that time, freestyle had become a focus thing, and that's where I spent my time.
So what you're saying is that where some people that we've talked to already, they were like, well, I wasn't any good at freestyle, but I needed the points. So that's the way you felt about disc golf? Not really
Yeah.
that great at it, but I need the points.
Well, I think starting 76, the North American Series tournaments would always have 2 featured events. And if you won one of the featured events, you got an automatic invitation to the Rose Bowl.
Okay.
And so I counted on winning a freestyle event at one of those tournaments. And I did play the other events in 76 and 77 and was able to get enough points. Actually, in 1976, I qualified for the Rose Bowl as an ultimate player. Ultimate was another sport. Yeah, I qualified as a freestyler, but early in the year, in that year, rather than having a championship game between established teams, they did it on an all-star basis. So they had regions around the country. Ultimate players would go to a regional tournament. They would play several games, and then the people at the tournament would vote on the 3 best players to come out of that particular tournament. And I played in the Northeast, and myself, Jim Herrick, and John Cohen were selected to come out of our region to play in the 76 Rose Bowl. Wow. In the ultimate all-star game.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
But I pretty much, I had enough points and also won enough freestyle tournaments to make it on that basis in 76 as well.
So normally our guests, they have a PDGA number. Well, everybody has a PDGA number so far, and they usually have some story about it. And we know you don't have a story about that. what about FPA numbers? So we're going to talk about the FPA later, but I just was thinking about this and sorry to jump the gun on you there, Mace. But
That's
did
quite
you
right.
have? I know the IFA had player numbers, and that got to be hundreds of thousands of players. The PDJ now is a couple hundred thousand players. But did the FPA issue player numbers?
We did. We didn't make as big a deal about it. I don't even know if they have continued it over the years. We didn't make that big of a deal about it because the freestyle community was kind of a transient one. People would kind of come in, they would have their season of being really good, really hot, whatever. They'd kind of drift out. So it wasn't quite the focus, for example, that golf had. I came back into Frisbee golf tournaments as Michelle started playing again to realize that somehow I was a rock star because I had number 302. It's like I never even paid any attention to it.
Right. It's
Yeah.
even myself. I'm 7477, but I look at events. I look and I'm like, okay, who's the low number at this event, and then I see if I know them, and then it's definitely something that you notice, and when you're running an event too. Last few
Well, I
times I've
mean,
run.
there is a history that is kind of enticing. I don't know how many people realize, but back in the day, back in the early days, if you were a Frisbee player that wanted to play in a tournament, you joined the International Frisbee Association, which is my original novice certificate, signed by an imaginary guy named Harvey J. Kukuk. And you would get this certificate and a letter from Harvey. Here's the letter right here. And then if you took what they called the world-class master test,
Right.
and you became a world-class master, you could go to the world championships in Pasadena. You'd have to get your own way there. And I went there in 75 and I got my world-class master certificate, also signed by Harvey J. Kukuk. And this was a big deal back then.
Is that like an AKA Dan Stork-Roddick or?
No, it was somebody at the time, Steady Ed Hedrick, kind of was the driving force behind this. But Brian, to the conversation you and I had on Sunday, the genesis of Frisbee sports kind of had a little bit of a flavor of a secret decoder ring type of feel to it in the beginning because Whammo was a toy company. And all of a sudden they have this toy that, like the hula hoop, that a lot of people like to play with. And so it kind of morphed from this sort of silly, gamey type thing into something that started to get serious. People started to realize, wow, you can really do real athletic things with this. And so it had that transition from toy and promoting it as such to becoming a genuine sporting good that spawned all these different sports.
Yeah, it was a great journey, and it really Whammo put a lot of money into the promotion of it. I mean, we know, and we'll get to this talking about this later about the product specificity of it, but that was a lot of money at the beginning that really made Frisbee a household name
No
throughout North
question about
America.
it. Yeah.
And since you have your certificate there, can we just digress for a second? You got that in 75. Did you get it at Pasadena? Where did you get that certificate?
At Pasadena, yeah. They actually had a proficiency test.
Okay.
So you had to demonstrate different throws, a few different catches. You also had to take an accuracy test. And I believe there was also a distance test. And we were using, ancient plastic at the time. And then you would be scored on all that. And assuming you passed all the different tests, you were awarded a grandmaster ranking.
Wow.
Yeah.
So do you
That's
remember
amazing.
who the judges were? Because they're sitting there judging you, right?
Yeah, I don't, because they had a lot of volunteers from the California players that were out there. And at that time I was an East Coaster guy, and that was the very first time I ever got on an airplane and traveled to a state different than New York State, other than going across to Canada, because as you know, Rochester is just across the lake. So I'd been to Canada, but I'd been out of New York State. And we went, Jim Palmieri, Jeff Hungerford, myself, and Jim's brother. We drove a van from Rochester, New York, all the way to Pasadena, and then I flew back on a one-way plane ticket.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a trip that had to have been.
Okay, well,
Oh, it
we
was
we
amazing.
we
Yeah.
are going to get into that because that's one of the questions I had for you about that. But before we do, let's just we've got the PDJ story out of the way, but the more important thing is your FPA status as not only the founder but as also in the Hall of Fame.
Yes. Yes. The as Brian and I were talking about on Sunday, there came a point, and it was around, I'd say around late 1977, really squarely in 1978, where players were starting to realize that they needed some advocacy for their sport. They needed a level of organization and a level of concentration that was promoting the interest of that sport. And there was starting to be a sense that we needed to legitimize these sports as something other than a captive promotional arm of a single manufacturing company. And so about the same time I'm doing the FTA, and the PDGA had, I think, had already been started by Ed Hedrick, who was at the time obviously a Whammo executive. But Tom Kennedy and some of the guys on the West Coast were developing the Ultimate Players Association.
Right.
And I was developing the Freestyle Players Association. And I literally went around at the Rose Bowl 1978 with a notebook, taking down names of Frisbee players who wanted to be part of this new organization that was going to come into being that was called the Freestyle Players Association. I actually found, I still have this. This was the original master list.
Wow.
The names that we collected at that original Rose Bowl, 78 Rose Bowl, names, addresses, and Michelle and I were doing this out of our apartment in Albany, New York, because I was in law school at the time. And we developed a newsletter that was called the FTA Forum. And the forum came out about half a dozen times a year. It would report on tournament results. But what we were doing is we were using the body of players to actually develop the rules for the sport, the judging system for the sport. That effort produced this competition manual that had the judging system laid out and how to run a tournament in it. And we published this. In fact, it still has my address there, 90 Morton Avenue in Albany, New York. And Jim Palmieri was very crucial in the development of the judging system because he had experience as a gymnast and then as a gymnastics coach.
Oh, I didn't know that about him.
Yeah, he had a lot of keen insight into how to conceive of evaluating two people or three people going out and jamming. And so we settled on difficulty, execution, and presentation. And so difficulty was how difficult of moves were the players exhibiting in their routine. Execution was, did they have drops? Were they dropping the disc or were they closing the catches? And then presentation was kind of the showmanship side of it. And of course, all the routines were done to music. And so choreography started to work into it. These are all things that, as players at these tournaments, we started to realize we need to refine. We need to formalize a judging system so it's not one way when you go to Toronto and another way when you go to Santa Barbara. It should be uniform. Everybody should know how they're going to be evaluated. And then how to pick a judging panel, how to run the judging panel. These are all things that we, as players, we actually voted on through this FTA forum. And then we compiled them into this manual that we then distributed widely throughout the playing community. And this was something we were doing in freestyle, but at the same time, the golfers were doing this in the PDGA. The ultimate players were doing this with Ultimate. And this was a critical developmental stage for the sport. And it also took the organization of the tournaments out of just this captured thing that Whammo had. And believe me, Whammo was not the bad guy here. Right. The sport would have never been what it has become without them. They were critical. And that's why I say the role that Dan Roddick played in helping us navigate from a captured public relations arm of WAMO to a legitimate sport that WAMO had a big part of and was a participant in, but also opened the way for Discraft to come in and Innova to come in and Floater, the guys in Southern California that came up with the floater disc. This was a critical stage in the development of all Frisbee sports. And it was happening right in that 78, 79, 80, 81 timeframe.
So
That's
let's
such an interesting aspect of our history, because like that could have just been like the end. Like, no, we're not going to get out of the way. And then slowly everything just kind of dwindled and got run into the ground or whatever. And
exactly.
And then but it really, like I say this all the time, and it really applies here. Like you guys swam through the narrow end of the funnel.
Yeah.
And then, you're in a tube for a little bit, and then all of a sudden it was infinite. And, and it's still infinite. It's still continuing to grow and deliver joy in so many different ways,
Yeah, and I would credit too. Everybody could see what Frisbee could become. Everybody was thankful for what got it started, and there were some summit meetings and different player organization meetings at which these things were discussed. And again, I think there were some critical people that helped steward that transition. Again, Dan was amazing through that. Jim Palmieri, the leaders of the different player organizations, Joe Cahow, all of these people were critical in helping get through that period of time, because WAMO was highly successful with these tournaments, and I mean what they spent to put on the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, that was huge. That was on CBS Wide World of Sports.
Yeah, for sure.
And so and then they sponsored tours that took it to Japan and to Europe.
And they flew you guys out there to play in the Rose Bowl.
What's that?
They flew you guys in to play. If you qualified, you
That's
got
right.
a plane ticket to fly in there. Like that's
absolutely.
So before we get too far down the road, because this is all fascinating stuff, and I want to preface this eventually talking to you about, because I think it's fascinating talking about that transition, as you say, from market captured, essentially one, a monolithic corporation to this widespread spectrum. Before we get there, let's just talk first of all about, we're going to get to your origin story, but I want to talk for people out there who may not be too much aware about the history of freestyle itself and where it comes from. I think you talk about Stork. I think Stork is essential to the freestyle story, to the Frisbee story, but also specifically freestyle. I've done some reading, and it comes out him and his father doing their trick catch performance routines, and they're doing it at the World's Fairs, and they're generating interest that way, and they're thinking they're inventing something. And in fact, freestyle, some of the earliest moves were called Eastern trick catch. And this is where in 72, 73, this is where it comes from. By the way, I just want to say, I said it to Mace before we went on the air. One of the early touring Frisbee shows was called the Good Times Professional Frisbee Show. So we're kind of hearkening back to, they had a whole show, we just have an hour.
Nice irony, right?
Right. Yeah. But I've said this. I think it's worth repeating now that we're streaming. I said it to you. It seems to me that the spirit of freestyle, the animating spirit of freestyle, comes more from that libertarian aspect, from the competitive, but also non-competitive, the artistic, the individualistic, and also at the same time a sense of communal, fraternal family, and they call it the Jamily. Maybe you can talk to us a bit more about that, the early spirit of freestyle and what kind of drew you to it.
Sure. In fact, I would say that my story is replicated a million times among the people in the early 70s when the tournaments started happening. Before August 1974, I had a group of guys that I hung out with. And, we had to work during the day, but at night, we'd go to this church parking lot. And have a few beers, smoke a joint, and we would play Frisbee. We would throw, catch, all that. We thought we were pretty good. I mean, we were jamming, man, and we'd get this real good lather going, this good exchange of disc. We pick up a few of the catches that were obvious catches that you could do, and then we see a poster on a telephone pole advertising a tournament that happened to be at the college I was attending, St. John Fisher College. It's now known as St. John Fisher University, but at the time it was St. John Fisher College. And it's like, oh my gosh, you're going to have a tournament here. Oh, we got to go to that. We'll do phenomenal, And so we go to the tournament, me and my buddy, and lo and behold, there's people from Chicago area. There's people from Boston area. There's people from New York City. There's people from the South, Tom Monroe and his group from the South. None of these people at this time had ever seen each other. A few of them had. John Kirkland was there, a couple of the West Coaster people. And everybody is kind of walking into this with their own frame of reference about playing, how they played, what they were doing. And it was such an eye-opening moment. It's like, oh my gosh, where are these people come from? You mean all these people were doing what we were doing, kind of thing? And this immediately created this energy and this desire that we got to do this more. We got to go to other cities and do this. And other people stepped up to organize tournaments. Of course, Toronto was one of the early ones that also came out of that. But it was this moment, this like explosion of creative energy where for the first time, people are seeing other folks that are doing what they were doing, and in many cases doing more than what they were doing. And now all of a sudden, everybody's got this creative juice going regarding freestyle. Now, obviously, it was a golf and DDC tournament, but every minute when one of those events was not going on, people are freestyling. People are throwing discs back and forth and trying different things and looking at the kind of discs. Some people were playing with what was known as a master at the time. Some people, I was a super pro guy, so I played with a disc like this. This is actually an Octad Super Pro. This used to be like state of the art for freestyle. And it was just this great moment of creative energy where people saw others from other parts of the country and they really wanted to go deeper into the experimentation and creative side of freestyle.
So let me ask you, you see the poster for this, you say it's DDC and disc golf or Frisbee golf. Had you actually, I mean, you're playing catch with your buddies, but had you even heard about those before? Did you even have any experience?
No, never heard about either one of them. All we knew was trick throw, trick catch. That's all we knew. But we knew this was a Frisbee tournament, and we thought we were good Frisbee players, so we were going to be there.
Right on.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great. That's really, I mean, I think that, like I told you a story about when I first started playing disc golf and we didn't want anything to do with the organized events. And then one Sunday afternoon, we saw them all playing the short tees. And we're like, we could do that. And then the next thing you know, we came to realize that we weren't, well, we didn't think we were great or good enough at the time, but we all kind of became competitive relatively quickly. And so it was pretty fun. And it was definitely seeing what other people could do in that situation was an eye opener as well.
One of the great things that came out of that first AFDO in 1974 was that not only did we see people from other parts of the country coming to the tournament, but we saw other players within the Rochester area. And that became the genesis of what became known as the Rochester Frisbee Club.
Okay.
And so all of our early players were at that tournament, and we gelled, of course, under Jim Palmieri's leadership. And it became a thing that was really beautiful for the Frisbee community in Rochester.
So that was the year that Stork wins the car, and there's the famous picture of Jim handing him the keys.
Yes.
Was there a big thing made of that? Were you guys like, oh my God, the guy won a car for winning this tournament?
Huge. It was a mind blower. I mean, you think about it, there were a lot of well-established sports that weren't giving cars to the winners. So this was like, oh my gosh, this is the big time. Where have I been? Have I been living under a rock? But of course, Jim, like so many things, was way ahead of his time. And by the way, he paid for that car for years after that.
Yeah, we've heard that from other people too. And that's another thing that, now that you mention it, in the 70s and the 80s, that was a super common prize for all kinds of gags.
Yeah.
And it kind of has gone away. I don't remember seeing or hearing of anybody giving away a car. Like,
Right.
they used to have like that. I don't remember what the movie was, but I've seen it plenty of times where you had to stay touching the car the longest in order to drive it away. But
Yeah.
there was I remember in my hometown as well, the local radio station gave away a car for basically the eating part of Fear Factor. Like, it was kind of like a Fear Factor gag before that ever happened, that show ever happened. And the guy that won it like put a dozen earthworms in some sort of a 2-egg cocktail and like put all this in like hot sauce, a whole bottle of hot sauce, and then he drank it and he won the car. And like, and I remember, I mean, I graduated from high school in 85, and I remember a bunch of that in the 70s and 80s, but I don't really remember of any of that recently.
Well, that really
Who's paying for them cars then that aren't paying for them now, I guess, maybe is my question.
that really put first of all, put the AFDO on the map, but secondly,
Sure.
it really set a high bar for other people who were there that wanted to host tournaments in their city, like Chicago and Tom down in Huntsville, Alabama, and all across the country. People saw the level of organization and the level of promotion that Jim did at that tournament. And that really kickstarted a lot of these tournaments to be what they were at the time, which were pretty darn good. I mean, they were well done.
So it seems to me that usually in the schedule, Toronto was before Rochester. And
no, I think it was the weekend after. I think it was usually after, yeah.
And in this case, in '74 is when Ken Westerfield and Jim Kenner run the Canadian Open that first features freestyle pairs.
Yeah.
It's like the first competitive tournament out there.
Yes.
But you said they were playing kind of a freestyle on the sidelines. Was the word freestyle in the buzz out there when they sang the word freestyle, or what was it being called?
Yeah, I think it was called freestyle at the time, but that's a very good question. It may have evolved right around that time. Because like you pointed out, the Toronto tournament there when Ken and Jim won that tournament, that was kind of the beginning of the idea that this could be an event. Right. And it could be judged, and it could, a winner could be picked. But that's one of the reasons why having a refined judging system was so important, because it's one of those things. Look at how people react to ice skating in the Olympics, and the Russians, they got the judges fixed and all of that. That was the same kind of thing that we often encountered with freestyle. So, but yeah, that was the beginning of it. And then also the Frisbee demos. Now, you mentioned Dan and his dad. Also, Victor Malafronte and John Kirkland, they had a gig in the early days, I think with the Globetrotters, where they would do like a halftime Frisbee demonstration, and those were highly effective.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, for you, when was the first time that you personally saw freestyle? Because we know you got hooked immediately, and that was the song of the siren. But
right.
Do you remember the first time that you saw like freestyle?
Yeah, it was that '74 AFDO. Again, me and my buddies, we'd play at the beach. We'd play in that church parking lot under the lights at night. That's all we knew until we went to the AFDO, and now we're seeing the group from New York City, and they were jammers. Washington Square Park people, the Central Park people. We saw the guys from Windy City, Jose Montalvo, Chow Rotman, these kind of guys. And that's when we saw, okay, and then there was Irv Kalb and Dan, and we're starting to see, okay, there's a whole body of tricks we have not even scratched the surface on. And it's interesting because that was '74. Then, winter comes and didn't play much during the winter, a little bit indoors. Come to a tournament in 75. I didn't advance much between those 2 years. And I see the state of play in 75, and it's like, wow, these guys were serious. These guys were serious about this stuff, because now there was a whole nother level of sophistication. And it was really, for me, between the late summer of 75 and through the winter of 75 that I really jumped on freestyle as this is going to be something I am going to throw a good part of my life into. That's when I started partnering with Creative.
Right.
We practiced all through the winter of 75, 76. We went to the Michigan indoor tournament in Ann Arbor, and out of nowhere, we took third, and people were like, who the heck are these guys? And then the first big tournament of the year in 76 was the Octad in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And again, nobody knew who Doug and I were. There were 80 freestyle pairs in that tournament, and we won. I mean, we just came in and won it. And
that's awesome.
That launched for me. Freestyle is okay. I got this law school thing, but freestyle is really what I'm doing here.
Well, that's really amazing. And I want to ask one more question about the AFDO before we, because we're like you're following the timeline that Paul has laid out for us pretty nicely. And do you think that most of the people that were at that first AFDO felt the same way as you did, and or we're seeing so much more than they ever imagined for the very first time? I mean, was that kind of the event that really opened it up, like across the country, kind of, so to speak, because these people all went home with what they saw and then tried to emulate that, and that was really where giant growth was attained?
Yeah, it certainly was one of them. Because the car was the prize, it drew more people from different parts of the country. There were other tournaments at the time, but they did not have the draw that one did. And so I think virtually everybody who showed up thought that they were pretty good until they saw, and several of them had a lot more reason to believe it than I did at the time.
Right.
Yeah, but that opportunity to be on a field with the group of people that were there and the influences that were there, to me, it was like a creative atom bomb. The way in which the different players reacted, the things that we saw, the things that happened there, it really was, for me, a Renaissance moment. It was like huge. And I think it was that way for many, many other players. Most of the players that were there, I mean, some of them had known the players from around the country. I think Dan did, certainly John Connolly in Chicago, Tom Monroe. Some of the people like that, they had been in touch with different quarters of the country. But for most of us to be there and to watch and to participate, that was the beginning of everything for me, and I think for many of the people who were there.
It sounds like it.
Let's take you to 75 now. And this is a bigger, now we know that you're doing law school and you have summers off, and so you.
Well, 75, I was actually still in college.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you still have summers off and you've got room
Yeah.
to travel, and so you start to travel. You go to the IFT in Michigan, you go to Toronto. Is that your first time to Toronto in 75?
Yeah, I don't think I went in 74. Yeah, 75 was the first time I went to Toronto.
Now, the one thing I want to ask you about, though, is your trip down to Pasadena. You get to go to the Rose Bowl. You get to go to the World Frisbee Championships.
Yes.
You jump in a car with Jim Palmieri and you drive out of Rochester. What do you think? How are you feeling? You're going to the Mecca of Frisbee. What kind of cloud nine are you on?
I am totally stoked. By that time I'd been humbled enough to know I am at the bottom. I'm in the basement in terms of what players can do, but I was determined. I know I had enough proficiency to probably pass the world-class master test. That was my goal. And I was excited to go and to see the state of the art. That was the main thing I was excited about. Not to mention, you know, driving across country and hanging out with good buddies and all that. We picked up Jeff Hungerford in Boulder because he was going to college there at the time. So we picked up Jeff and his girlfriend, went on through the mountains, went on through Utah, got out there. We were staying in the dorms, I think, at was it Caltech or UCLA, one of the universities out there? Irvine. It was UC Irvine. That's what it was. And yeah, I mean, it was exciting beyond my wildest dreams. It was unfortunate Michelle couldn't go with me at that time. I was in between summer jobs. She was working a job, so she couldn't come. And meeting the people and starting to get an approach in my mind of how I was going to improve. I think that was the real win for me being out there.
Well, you saw, I mean, the best of the best in the world
Yes.
at that time had come out there. Now, freestyle is added officially as a sport both to the 75 AFDO and the World Frisbee Championship. So that
Yes.
must have given you the flavor to, and certainly the passion to improve your own game, because you want to come back and you want to be there in the finals, right?
Yes.
The
And-
finals, that's a great venue because everybody on that Sunday is watching the huge spectator sport finals.
That's right. That's right. Yes,
Well,
and
you know,
we did a great job with that tournament. I mean, they actually had a couple of celebrities that they would have there. Sally Field was there one year. Larry Hagman was there one year. These are people who were famous
nice.
back then. And yeah, so it was a big deal. That's what switched me on to go back after that tournament and work like the devil all through the winter and, you know, really get some things going on.
So
That's you know, Tita told me a really amazing fact about those events that you may not be aware of, but apparently the Frisbee Championships were the first renter of the Rose Bowl. Like
Oh,
nobody had actually rented the Rose Bowl before that. And so I imagine that, you know, that was another in a different direction, was another somewhat of a headwater for, I mean, like then they started having rock shows in venues like that and you know, anything else you can imagine, monster trucks now and supercross, but like in the 70s it was strictly for football, you know, and
yeah.
pretty
Well, the one thing with the Rose
one-dimensional.
Bowl, it is so huge. Like literally, they would get 40, 50,000 people to come to the Rose Bowl Frisbee Championships. And if the cameras were on the side of the players facing the stands, it was jam-packed with people. But if the cameras were on the other side, there would be nobody behind you because, like I said, it's so big. But the crowd there was huge. Every time I was there 75, 6, 7, 8, 9. And every time the crowds were huge.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you know, Tita told us a story about hearing about it on the radio when she was driving around with her parents as a 15-year-old. And there's just so much cool nostalgia to that situation. I mean, like I miss listening to the radio, but I certainly don't miss the commercials. But I miss hearing like that same kind of thing, like people giving away a car, having we're gonna have a Frisbee contest. Y'all need to come on out. And that's, you know, that kind of thing doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, so that picture you have on the screen, that was the freestyle finals in 1979. My partner was John Jewell, and we took second. And you can see that's the crowd, you know, the camera's facing the section of the Rose Bowl where the crowd was sitting.
Right.
And it was crazy.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Now, did you, don't want to jump too far ahead, but just speaking to that, did you ever have performance issues like in front of people? Did you get nervous, or were you just so zoned in the jam, didn't matter?
It's funny you mention it. I mean, of course I did, but in the early days, really so. In 1976, when Doug and I kind of burst onto the scene at the Octad, and we came on the scene, and the Velasquez brothers came on the scene at the same time. We won that tournament. They took second. We both had, for the day, amazing routines. I mean, very well executed. And we went out there, Doug and I went out there, and the crowd for, you know, for a tournament like that, the crowd was huge. I mean, that was the big, Octad was the biggest tournament of the day at that time. And we got out there, our music's playing, and we are just playing great. And I had so much adrenaline going that I actually had to stop our routine with about 20 seconds to go because I had the dry heaves. I was
Oh,
that
man.
wound. I was that wound, and I was that excited, and I just had to, you know, time us out. Fortunately, we had by that point had done quite enough to win the tournament. But yeah, there were times when it was,
Wow.
but it very often caused me, I think, to play better. Another routine I had like that was in 1979. My partner in 79 was John Jewell, and we played together in 3 tournaments: Santa Barbara, Boulder, and the World Championships. And in Santa Barbara, we were the last team to go on in that tournament. It's a famous routine because it had gotten dark, so they pulled up cars to light the field.
Nice.
But that
And
wasn't enough light, was it?
yeah, and I was, you know, obviously I was jacked because, you know, we were the last team to go on. The play had been very good. And John and I just did this magical routine. I mean, magical in the sense that it almost didn't matter if there was any light at all, because we weren't going to miss anything. And it was the same kind of thing where you're kind of overcome with the moment of, oh my gosh, we got to do this. It's dark, car lights are coming in, and yet you just kind of let go of everything and you play. And so that was another one of those times where you got to have all this, you know, uptightness, and you just say, the heck with it, I'm gonna go out and play.
So
And
just to that point, to that story about playing, the FBA website has got the Decade Awards, and you guys are tied for the best routine in the late 70s in the decades. From that thing, and I just want to read to you what they say. People pulled up their cars to add light, any light they could. Even that was minimal and had a negligible effect. They, John, JJ, and Dave, played out of this world and seemed to be on sonar as they pulled off every move in their repertoire to seal the victory. Those who were there were in stunned disbelief. Would Did the crowd just go ape when you guys finished?
absolutely crazy. It was just like people screaming, like, what the heck was that? You know? And no one was more surprised than JJ and me. It was like, okay, you know. And then we played again in Boulder and had another great routine, won that tournament, and had a great semifinal at the Rose Bowl, got into the final, had a pretty good routine. John played really well. I didn't play as well. And we were winning until the last routine. And then the threesome of Joey, Jeff, and Donnie won that year.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay, well let's take it to 76 because since you mentioned Joey, that's a good segue. Mace, why don't you jump in there?
Yeah. So 76, you had you paired up with Doug Correa, and
Yes.
the semifinals were traditionally the hot round, but the mastery of the nail delay really revolutionized freestyle play at that point. So tell us a little bit about how, I mean, when you saw that the first time, what did you think? And then tell us how it just really advanced the whole game.
Yeah, well, the first time I remember seeing the nail delay used actually in a routine was that Ann Arbor tournament in early 76. March, I think it was March of 76, Ann Arbor indoor tournament at the University of Michigan.
Right.
And Richie Smits and Joey Hudocklin were there, and they whipped that out. And at the time, Jose Montalvo from Chicago was using a stick. He called it a Molina stick. And he incorporated that in his routine sometimes, where he would let the disc ride on the stick. But very quickly, people were realizing that the disc riding on a fingernail had a lot more possibilities. And Richie and Joey were using a different disc. They were actually using a disc known as a CPI. It was a completely different manufacturer, and so I think they were able to use it at the Michigan indoor tournament, but not in the NAS tournaments for Whammo. And so, at the time, it was enough of a move to have it spin on your finger. So what people were doing is they'd take the disc in on their finger and they would look at it, and it would be spinning there, and people would go, "Wow, that's incredible!" And then they would do something to catch it. But very quickly, it became a thing to now start to keep the disc spinning on your finger and pass it around your body, under a leg, behind your back, whatever. But at the time, all of the Frisbees, like this Super Pro here, had Whammo writing inside the disc.
Oh,
So
right.
a copyright notice. There was the classic play, catch, invent games and all that was in raised lettering on the back of the disc. So and then there was this nub where the injection mold put the plastic into the mold. And so freestylers who wanted to do delay, we took to getting razor blades and shaving off all of the writing inside the disc. Yeah. And so very quickly in 76, we went from Richie and Joey and probably a few other people looking at a disc spinning on their finger to now cutting off all this stuff on a Whammo disc and incorporating the nail delay into various moves. So it went pretty quickly.
And is that about the time that slicking the disc started to become an option too?
Exactly. Silicone spray became a mandatory item in every freestyler's bag. A razor blade and that, and then fake nails.
Oh yeah, right.
Became the thing.
And super glue. You had to have super glue too, though.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's interesting about the before the nail delay, there was what we call controlled tipping.
Yes.
But what's interesting is that these meets are great times for people because they go away, they practice their own little moves. Maybe they might become ingenious and invent new moves. But these meets are like swap meets too. These events are chances for like the information to get out there, get fertile, and people go, "Whoa, I never thought about doing that," and then that gets them thinking about doing something else.
Yes.
And so the progression of moves leaps ahead in evolutionary bounds. It's
yeah. I mean, with the game, the game that I was playing when I went to my first tournament was the game most people were playing, which was catch. And catch, with different trick catches, trick closings, created flow. And the flow was created back and forth between two players. But with tipping and delay, and then rim delay, now you were able to create flow within one player's turn. Right. And so it started with tipping under the legs, tipping with the foot, tipping behind the back. And the natural outgrowth of tipping became delay, and then incorporating delay and tipping so that you could move the Frisbee around your body and create flow with yourself and then move it on to the next player. And then from that became cooperative moves where I'm tipping the Frisbee to you, you're rim delaying it over to me, I'm airbrushing it back to you. And, it just like you said, Paul, it became this compiling of innovation between different teams.
And one of the in the history that already out there, fabulous, lots of information. Frisbee Guru is a great source of information for the history of the sport. But one of the kind of the key moments is when you've got Joey and Richie moving from Washington Square to Venice Beach and taking the East Coast style, which was mainly nail delay, tipping, and catch, to the West Coast, which was a lot of airbrushing and kicking and a lot of different flow riding the wind. And that marrying of the two was another point of explosion of knowledge and
that's a very good point. Richie and Joey and Clarence Rothway and some of the guys, Kerry Colmeyer, Craig Van Sickle, a lot of these guys were playing. Some of them, the Washington Square Park Wizards, Jeff Felberbaum was in that group. These guys were playing in a very contained space with buildings and trees all around them. So they, at least in the early days, were less focused on airbrushing, more focused on tipping and delaying and all of that. And then as they migrated in these other tournaments, started to incorporate a lot of airbrushing. I mean, Joey became, state of the art in airbrushing very quickly, and had a complete game, especially as he moved on to the West Coast. But yeah, a lot of different emphasis depended on where the player came from. And the New York City guys were very good with the delays and the tipping and all of that. And the West Coast people were very much wind players.
Right.
Venice Beach was a hot spot for players at the time, and a lot of the airbrushing and body roll techniques were coming out of there.
Body rolls, yes. It's fascinating to see what to me is as an outsider is fascinating to hear some of the catch names, and we'll get into that later. But so far we've been talking just about the kind of the standard ones, but eventually we're going to get into the most famous, the Guidus, and it still befuddles me why it's called that. But before we get there, I had a question, a little digression. We talked about Captain Snap earlier a couple weeks ago, and one of the things that he participated in I think starting in 77, was the Smithsonian Air and Space Frisbee Disc Festival. Do you remember that? And were you asked to attend? Did you attend? Did you help out?
I didn't, because typically it fell during a time when I was in school, but that was a very influential event because they drew huge crowds to it. It was a great kind of a demonstration, kind of a exhibition type event. And there were a lot of people that really were a big part of it. I think Scott Zimmerman did a lot with that, and the Virginia Frisbee group really owned that, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was a great event. I mean, it exposed a lot of people to
Oh yeah.
Frisbee.
When you see those photos taken where everybody's throwing a frisbee in the air, when you see 3,000 frisbees flying in the air, there's something so entrancing about
Oh
it
yeah,
all.
yeah. It used to make the news around the country, when they had it. It was good.
So let's, without further delay, let's step right into 1978, Mace.
Well, in 78, you were pretty busy with law school and with founding the FPA. And that's something that you told me the story the other day about walking around at Santa Cruz at the World Championships, or the World Flying Disc Championships, collecting names. You've already showed us the roster that you had typed up afterwards. That's what do you remember about that time? I mean, did it seem like you were breaking ground there, or did you feel like you had a fight on your hands? Or I mean, what was the emotion there that kind of drove you to do that?
Yeah, I think there, I have to be honest. I think there was a little bit of a sense of, I don't know if fight would be the right word, but there was a sense that, college students, itinerant Frisbee players, there was this like, we're being controlled by the man kind of thing. And so there was a little bit of that sentiment of I'll give you a perfect example, okay? Here's a shirt. Once the FPA was formed and we were determined we were going to put on our own series of tournaments, an independently sanctioned series of tournaments that we were going to call the New World Tour. And we did these shirts. And you see there FFF in 1980. FFF stood for Free Frisbee Freestyle. And all small F's, as if to say, we are not recognizing the trademark of Frisbee. There was this sense that it was like Xerox or Kleenex, where it was such in common use that you know, all of that, and not all of that was necessarily constructive, but there was this sentiment that if this sport is ever going to be legitimized, the sanctioning body of the tournaments needed to be independent from the people who made the plastic. Otherwise, it was going to forever be a marketing idea of a successful toy company. And so, and I think that the Ultimate Players had a sense of that because they were starting to really like to use the Ultra Star by Discraft as the ultimate disc, as at least an alternative to the 160. Right. The golfers, they had a whole galaxy of different discs that were coming to be in the disc world, and they wanted to take advantage of those. And so there, and the freestylers, again, we were more the bohemian types, we were more the free radical types, and so there was a little bit of that behind it, but mostly it was, and this is why I say Dan Roddick was so crucial in this transition, because he got it. He understood that that was an evolution that the sport needed to have. But he was trying very hard, and he was successful in making sure we didn't burn the house down while we were still living in it. And so there was a lot of going back and forth, and Dan was excellent with it. In fact, in 1979, the FPA was formed in 78. So in the season of 1979, Dan said, okay, the Freestyle Players Association can be the judging organization that judges the North American Series tournaments. And I think the first one where we did that was actually that Santa Barbara tournament in 1979. So Dan was on board. He was like I said, he was indispensable in that transition. And you know, there was a lot of energy around making sure this happened. Not all of it good, but the result ultimately was good because you know, people were applying some wisdom to it to make sure, like I said, we didn't burn the house down while we were still living in it.
So I know, sorry, Mace, just a quick question about the litigious nature of Whammo. I know Ed in the early days pursued some cease and desist letters when it came to using the patented phrase disc golf. Was Whammo kind of aggressive in sending those cease and desist letters if you used Frisbee?
Not really. I think again, Dan was a great go-between the players' organizations and the company. I think sometimes it even got him in some hot water with the management at Whammo, but Dan is a superb diplomat. Okay, I told you already, he was wicked smart. He was a very good diplomat and a good steward of the sport. I don't think people realize how much his contribution meant to not only making the good old days good, but actually transitioning to a time when Frisbee golf kind of went off in its direction and became what it is today, and all the other Frisbee sports as well. He was critical in that, and so he was able to kind of broker where the interests of the company, because obviously he was an executive of the company, wants it to succeed, but at the same time he was first and foremost a player and wanted to make sure that the sport moved along in a healthy direction, and he succeeded at it, I think.
Absolutely, patron saint status for sure.
So, well, so along that same line, I have a little different question, but was there hostility from Whammo towards these ideas, or was it easy to sway them and show them, hey, look, this is what the people want, and that's kind of what you need to do? Because I mean, it's their foot in the bill. They're spending lots of money for these big events and putting up great prize purses, but
well, I mean, what they ultimately did was they made it clear that in the North American Series that they sanctioned and that they put on, you have to use Whammo products. That was real. And so when we played in freestyle tournaments that were part of the NAS, that's what you had to do. But we started in 1980 what we called the New World Tour. This was our logo. This is a shirt that Michelle had.
Ah.
And we had our tournament sites around the country. Rochester, New York was one. Toronto was one, I believe. Austin, Texas was our World Championships.
Right.
We had a tremendous tournament promoter there, guy by the name of Chris Baker. I think he's died in recent years, but tremendous guy. Got a great sponsor, Mickey's Malt Liquor. Just did a first class job on this. I mean, and then Tom Schott in Santa Cruz.
Right.
We had a real tournament series that we put together. It had about 7 tournaments. It was freestyle, freestyle, freestyle. So there was men's pairs, women's pairs, co-op, and mixed pairs.
Right.
We had 4 events at these tournaments, and they were a rock show. They were tremendous. I mean, it was a total blast. And so those tournaments were going on alongside the WAMO tournaments. The WAMO tournaments were their thing, and so you played by their rules. But there started to be independent tournaments that allowed us to bring the sport forward with other manufacturers and the like.
So
Yep.
at that time when you had that Austin event, then there was 3 different world championships that summer, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about the WAMO event and Tom Schott's event at Santa Cruz, and then y'all's event in Austin.
Yeah. Well, WAMO's was a WAMO World Championships that was an overall championships.
Oh,
Tom
okay.
Schott's was an independent overall World
Mhm.
Championships. This was a World Freestyle Championship.
Right.
Someone
A
could be a
little bit
world.
like boxing, right? The WWE, all these different sanctioning bodies. But we became the recognized among freestyle players. We became the world championships of freestyle. Now, did every freestylist want to go out to the Rose Bowl and win it? Of course they did. Just like, if you're a professional golfer, you want to win the PGA, you want to win at Augusta, you want to, British Open. But
Right.
I think it was a good thing because it brought Frisbee out of its adolescence and allowed it to go into these different disciplines independently.
In a way, you go from a monopoly to almost like an open source marketplace environment. And
Yeah.
The
And
fact that
again, I say WAMO was not the bad guy in this.
No.
WAMO did more for the sport than you could imagine. But obviously there came a point where there was conflicting interests. Their interest, of course, they're making these discs, they're spending the money to promote the sport. They want a return on that. That's understood. It's interesting because at the time I'm in law school, when I came out of law school, my area of practice was actually intellectual property protection, trademarks, copyright, patent, that kind of thing was what I did. And so, yeah, but no, WAMO did what you would expect a company to do that was sinking that kind of money into it. And that's why I said we were fortunate to have somebody who who was in both worlds and could broker that exchange, that transition.
Now, before we leave 1978, I want to dwell on Toronto. That we had the National North American Series in Toronto in '78. You win with Corey Basso and Brian Roberts.
Yes.
Big, deep field there. With second place for the V Bros. Joey Hidoquin took third, and Richie Smits took fifth. I mention this for 2 reasons, because one of which is you inspired a lot of the Toronto golfers there, the Toronto freestylers, Pat Bertrand among them. He remembers you, great, profound, and fond memories. Thinks very highly of you and was really inspired by you from this win. And one of our other guests we had on 2 years ago, I don't know if you've ever met him. He was at the Big Apple Jam in 2016 when you got inaugurated. His name is Wayne Kahn.
Oh.
And he was inspired first to play freestyle by watching you, but this is somebody I want to ask you about that was at that tournament. He was really inspired by Brian Urie of the Washington Square Wizards. Do you remember Brian?
Yes, I actually ended up that year in '78 playing in the Rose Bowl with Brian Ure and Clarence Brathwaite. And that was a, yeah, well, first of all, just because you mentioned Brian was a very unique athlete. I don't think he ever understood how good he was or could be. He's one of these guys in the freestyle world. Everybody has their spin, the spin that they need to have to do their tricks. Brian was one of these guys, either spin, either hand, super athletic. If he lacked anything that kept him from being like out of this universe freestyler, may have been kind of the discipline to just contain it and structure it and all that. But as just a physically gifted person, he was off the charts.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's, one of the problems with the holes in the archival material and the historical material is PDGA does a very good job with their database, but it's just disc golf. And when you look back in the magazines, you only see, the box scores, and so you only see the top finishers. You don't know who came to all these tournaments. And these were big events. They were well attended, but all their names so far are lost to history because we don't have that somewhere that's easily accessible, or even if it is accessible. That's just my own little personal comment from the archivist side. But we want to move ahead here. Why don't you already brought up the New World Tour, Mace. Why don't you jump in with 1980? Because that was another big year as well.
Yeah.
Right. Well, so in 1980, we have bounced around a little bit, and you talked about this a little bit, but 1980 was the beginning of your New World Tour, and it was 7 events, and it was an attempt to promote the freestyle nationally and worldwide. And one thing that I meant to ask earlier, and just to kind of go along with this, the FPA is still in operation today, correct?
Yes, it is.
And
Yes.
we talked the other day, and you were talking about how a lot of the things that are going on now are mostly in Europe. But I think it's interesting that that's grabbed a stronghold. But back to the 1980. National Freestyle Series was important, and it was a player-run organization, not tied to one product. And it's pretty amazing. Like, well, you got Moosehead to sponsor in Santa Cruz back then. 7,500 spectators watching the finals, and then in 1980 FPA Championship in Austin. Both of these events were covered on national TV, and this kind of brings me to, like, this is really all kind of building. I mean, there's already been several $50,000 events, but we talked about this on Sunday a little bit, and I've talked with Paul and other guests too, that it really is striking to me how in the infancy of all these organized Frisbee sports were these big monster events. And then something happened in the 80s going into the 90s where, I mean, obviously part of that had to do with Kransco buying Whammo, but nobody really saw any merit to grabbing the ball, or the flat ball as it were, and running with it in that situation. And it obviously took us a really long time to get back to that point. But it's, I just find it interesting that there wasn't a huge transition anywhere in there,
Yeah, and you often wonder how we would define success. If you think about it in terms of participation, like how many people today play Frisbee golf at a high level, play ultimate at a high level, I'd say that the efforts of the 70s and 80s were successful because both of those sports are very mature. I mean, you were watching Sunday. You were watching a professional golf tournament
It
on
was, and if you missed it, it was captivating. I mean, it was. I
real
was like,
money was
I need to
going
go out and
down.
ride my bike, and I was like, "There's no chance I'm leaving right now." I mean,
Yeah, and ultimate is played in colleges and universities and high schools all over the country and all over the world. So I think the evangelism side of what we were trying to do in the 70s and 80s does have a measure of success. I distinguished in our conversation on Sunday freestyle as opposed to those other two, because freestyle at its elemental level is a game of catch, right? Are
Sure.
people playing catch with frisbees around the world? Yeah. But do we have this cadre of disciplined freestylists all over the place that are taking the sport to new heights, and where tournaments are popping up in different places that show the sport at its absolute best? That has not happened, and at least not to my way of seeing it. I mean, when I think of what the tournaments were like that we put on in 1980, okay, for example, we had an organizer in Boulder, Rick Kovacic. We had Chris Baker in Austin. We had Tom Schott on the West Coast. We had Jim Palmieri in Rochester. And these tournaments, again, this is just one that I have a brochure from. We had a triumphant of success there. We had a promoter, a sponsor, and a sanctioning body. The sanctioning body being the FPA. The promoter made sure everything on the ground happened. Players had places to go, to stay, to eat. They had a venue where the tournament was going to take place. They had a sponsor that promoted it on the radio and TV, and also on the actual venue. And of course, the FPA came in and ran the tournament. This was a very successful formula. And so we were able to put on some pretty good events. I mean, events that you'd see today and you'd say, wow, that was kind of a big deal. And I don't know, because I haven't been traveling around, so I may be speaking out of ignorance. But I went to that World Championship in Brooklyn when I was inducted into the Hall of Fame. In fact, right over my shoulder there is the Hall of Fame plaque. Yeah. And it was a wonderful day, and it was a wonderful moment with a lot of the old timers, the V brothers, and my old partner Doug Correa, and a lot of really great guys and gals. But the actual tournament, as a World Championships, was a non-event. I mean, it was not promoted widely. I mean, we're in New York City, and the opportunity to really have a big event was there, but they didn't have the promotion. They didn't have the promoter that could find a sponsor and really drive the thing home. And I don't know what the other ones are like. I know the World Championships for 2024 are in Europe, and I've seen some of the things they do over there, and they are well promoted. They are well organized. They are things that get a lot of attention. And this is the thing that's really something, is the level of play right now is otherworldly. I mean, the level of difficulty and the level of execution of that difficulty in a lot of these routines, I don't think people have any idea how amazing freestyle play has gotten. And it just kind of pains me a little bit that there aren't tournaments being organized that really can showcase that in a way that the general public could see and say, oh my goodness, we got to look deeper into this.
It makes some great points. I mean, obviously everything evolves and moves on. And just culturally, Frisbee was everywhere in the 70s and early 80s in North America.
Yeah.
And taste shift, taste change, attitude shift, behavior shifts. People get into different things. You could blame the transition from a general Frisbee happy populace to whatever they were onto, video games, other types of entertainment. Who knows? But
I think some of it too is that one of the qualities of the early days is kind of still present, and that is that a lot of the organizing is done by the players. And freestyle, maybe more than the other sports, really is a family type of thing. Right. The players are very close to one another. They look forward to seeing each other. They get together, and honestly, I think they would enjoy the tournament, whether anyone was there or not. They just love the competing and the playing and the exchange of ideas and all that. It almost demands that there be a kind of a professional core of people who have a heart for the sport and desire to promote it, and are really focused on that. And that's kind of a hard ask from people who are in the playing community, because they want to play. Yeah. And I understand that. That was kind of the way I was. That, yeah, I don't know what the answer is there, and I'm probably again not as up on what's actually going on around the country as I should be. But that was just an impression I got from following from a distance, and then actually going to a World Championship event when I was inducted into the Hall of Fame.
So let me ask you, take you back to 1980. You've already said the promoter is the one who gets everything ready on the ground floor. The sponsor is the one who gets the media attention, tries all
And
that
prize money, you know.
prize money. And then the FPA comes in and runs the event. The FPA, would that be just you at that time?
No, we had other folks as well. I mean, Jim Palmieri was very instrumental in that too. And we would have volunteers at the site that would actually run the judging panels and organize the pools and all the things that needed to be done to make sure that you had a well-ordered preliminary round, semifinal round, and final round.
So, but that first year of the New World Tour, did you go to each and every one of those events?
Yes, I did.
That's a lot of miles.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And now that's the same year that the Sky Styler comes out. How does that change the game for you guys?
Yeah, the Sky Seller became the I don't know if I have one here, became the official disc. Actually, this is the Sky Styler of the 1980 New World Tour. And this was actually the disc I believe we used on the trophies. But this was very much it's black, so you know it's distinctive, but clear ones or light blue ones. This is what a lot of the players were playing with at that time, was a Sky Styler just like this.
Did that quickly become your preferred personal
Oh yeah, that
camera?
was definitely my preferred. And actually, I noticed when I was at that tournament 2016, that's what most of the people were playing with.
That's
was
cool.
was that. Yeah.
You couldn't say that. I mean, with Ultimate, with Guts, those discs have always said it's only really disc golf where the golf technology is taken off. They're still playing with the same design that they came out 44 years ago. I love that. I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, I mean the aerodynamics needed for a freestyle disc. I mean, what you need is a big wing. You don't necessarily need the kinds of angles and things that you guys are used to with golf discs.
Right.
And you obviously want a nice, clear, smooth bottom. But yeah, the Sky Styler served everybody pretty well.
Well,
So
you mentioned just a little bit ago, one of the things that you mentioned about freestyle. I think this really is common in all types of frisbee, and that's that family aspect. Because I know that I look forward to going to Rock Hill every year in October and seeing all my uncles, aunts, nieces, and nephews and cousins, or however you want to look at it. I mean, I've watched people over the 25 years of that event. I've watched people's babies become, parents
Yes.
and move on into the world and do their thing. And it's, for me especially, I don't think it's any different. And I think that's one of those, going back all the way back to the beginning of the frisbee. There's something about that toy that has captivated all of us in one way or another. And it's, whether it's going back to me in the 80s, after concerts, saying, hey, we're not going to wait in line, we're going to sit in the parking lot, drink a couple extra beers, and play catch until the parking lot clears. And those, I mean, that kind of thing puts a hook into you. And like when you guys went to the FDO that first time, same kind of thing. Like, you were already hooked, but that hook was set at the AFDO.
Exactly.
And we're, I remember several different, I remember some party event, October Frizz was another one of those where it was just as much about fellowship and friendship and seeing who was coming from where, as it was about the tournament that got in the way of the party. And then they're not all events are like that, but there's a great healthy mix of all of that. And again, the common thread is, hey, I'm glad get to see you today. I sure can't wait till I cross paths with you again, so on and so forth. So for me, that was one of the things that hooked me in. And, I became pretty decent at organization and way better at organizing than playing.
Well, the sport needs both, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what that first trip to the Rose Bowl in '75, driving across the country with a couple of good friends, and then hanging out with the players, and realizing that, wow, this is not just a pastime, this could be a way of life, which appealed to me in my 21-year-old self. And that's when I purposed in my mind, yeah, I want to put a lot of my time into this. And it was that camaraderie and just the travel and being with the people. And that's the other thing. In those days, 76, 77, 78, 79, people traveled in caravans between the different tournaments. I mean, we went from Boulder one year to Minneapolis, and we spent time. There was a bunch of us. We were literally camping in the Rockies. It was Jackie Entwistle, Joey Hudocklin, Randy Osborne, Jim Palmieri, Jamie Molt, myself, my wife, my dog, and we're just camped by this little river in Colorado, and we're playing Frisbee and just hanging out. And I mean, those days are precious. We had another in 78 and 9. We went when we went up to Seattle for the tournament there, we camped on Mount Baker, and we climbed Mount Baker, and we Dave Johnson was there, and a number of the older players, and we just traveled in a group from tournament to tournament. We shared money, we shared food, we shared rides, everything. It was a great experience.
And what was the musical situation like? Was it just radio? Did you have an 8-track on there? Were there
Boom
fights over
boxes.
the soundtrack?
Boom
Boombox, okay.
boxes with cassette tapes was the thing.
Okay.
You set one of those down, put on a tape, and started playing.
So
And
actually,
that,
that's another question about the music in routines. That now, I mean, you can't imagine freestyle without music, at least on the high level performative aspect. Um, did you guys have a favorite song that you wanted to perform to?
We always had music, and I know there was a Billy Cobham song that Doug and I played to with great success. Johnny Jewel and I played to Steely Dan almost exclusively, and also some Doobie Brothers. The V Brothers were famous for Doobie Brothers music in their routines. But yeah, music was a big part of it, a big part of it.
So I was listening to a great podcast that Jens and Erwin were talking about the whole performance side, and they were really ones to take it to the next level in terms of flashy outfits and especially picking songs that would work to the crowd, the taste of the crowd. You may like a particular rhythm or a particular song, but they picked ones that went for the crowd as show performers, as showstoppers. What was it like to just sit there and watch Jens and Erwin shred?
Jens and Irwin were the gold standard in terms of showmanship. And it wasn't that their showmanship was all that they had. The difficulty of their routines was top flight. Their execution was typically amazing. And they worked very hard at constructing routines that would delight a general audience. And this is why they were extremely popular in Japan. They were extremely popular in Europe, especially Sweden. And of course, they were extremely popular here. But they went with the unitard type bodysuits, and they picked very good choice of music to get the crowd going. They had great energy. I mean, they were without a peer in terms of the kind of energy they could create in a routine.
it's
Not
really
only,
amazing.
but they not only were they among the very, very best players for a lot of years, but they were also two of the finest human beings that you could meet anywhere, not just on the Frisbee tour. But there was not a person that played Frisbee that ever met them that didn't have anything but the highest regard for them. They were sweet. They were humble. And if anybody had a reason to be jerks, it was them, because they were so darn good. Never anything but good vibes, good humility, wonderful guys.
When I read the wrap-up reports in the old magazines about the World Finals, about the Rose Bowl finals, the Sunday night parties are usually the ones that are the most lit, and any kind of dance competitions or disco dance lessons were always headed by the Velasquez brothers. Do
Ooh.
you recall those famous Sunday nights?
Oh, yes. Irwin, especially. Irwin was a terrific dancer. And I mean, these guys are from Peru. And in South America, when people get together for a party, it's at somebody's home, and the main event is dancing. And they were great dancers, and Irwin especially was really, really good. All the girls wanted to dance with Irwin.
Nice. So in 1982, it was the final WFC at Rutgers. So was there a big drop off after that event, or were things continuing to ramp up? Or what did that leave where did that leave things, that it was the final one, and
Which
was there
year are
momentum?
you referring to?
82.
82.
82, the final WFC World
Yeah.
Frisbee Championship at Rutgers.
Yeah, things had definitely tailed off by then. The cachet of the tournament, uh, obviously, when you compare the Rose Bowl to Rutgers University, it doesn't compare. The competition was still good, but the visibility of it, the honor of it, and the other thing I would mention too is that by 1982 players were really now more focused on the golf championships, the freestyle championships, the ultimate championships. It was less so about all around. And so, I mean, there were people who were still excelling at all around and all, but the focus was now more directed at, hey, if you're a golfer, you want to win a PDGA event. That was where your focus was. And if you're
Right.
a freestyler, you wanted to win the World Freestyle Championships. So I think that was just a natural outgrowth of the very thing we talked about earlier, where there came a point in time where people realized that they want to focus on a specific Frisbee sport, less about just being this general Frisbee player.
That's a good point. I mean, especially with the rise of the PDJ. However, I wonder if as WIFDIF gets launched or got launched in 80, 84, 85 was the first world WIFDIF overalls, if that kind of kept the flame going in
Yeah, I'm
the
sure it did.
international sense.
Yeah, I sure did. And there's a lot of state championship tournaments.
Right.
The Virginia States is a huge tournament, and so it was happening on that level and happening very well, but it wasn't quite like what we knew when the Rose Bowl years were going on, and some of the other West Coast tournaments that were big deals.
So I want to take you to 83, just briefly, because I know that you came again. Your involvement on the island, I think we were talking about this before we went into the live stream. You were the three-time Canadian Open champion.
Yeah, 76, 7, and 8.
So before we talk about 83, I know Brett, currently the guy who's one of the best freestylists in Toronto and leading the freestyle community. He wanted to ask you specifically about your impressions of the early Toronto community with Ken Westerfield. You were good friends with Ken, weren't you?
Yeah, we were friends and saw each other at all the tournaments and all that.
And
These
so,
were these were at the time, these were the people everybody wanted to be like. Okay. Ken, another guy that was super talented and super humble. And he had a style of play that just drew your attention. He was long, lanky, really flexible, really powerful. And he was one of the early icons of the sport. One of
yeah,
the great Ken Westerfield moments, by the way, is when he set the world record in distance at the Boulder tournament. I can't remember, it was either 76, 78, somewhere in there, but he had a sidearm delivery. He was known as among the best sidearm delivery throwers in the world. And man, he caught a throw. He caught the wind just right. I think the thing went like 500 feet, which at the time, was just unheard of. It was just a freak giant throw that blew the minds of everybody there. And he always had that possibility of doing something extraordinary.
Wow. Well, I know Pat Chartrand has said that essentially your support, your attendance, and not just you personally, but the Rochester Club, the proximity of Rochester, helped put Toronto on the map and helped cultivate a world-class scene here to where in 83 you come to the tournament and you see a couple of local Canadian boys, Kevin Sparkman and Brian McElwain, win that tournament. Do you remember those guys?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
What
They were, they were amazing. I have to say, the Toronto tournament, in all the years that it was there, and mostly it was on Toronto Island. I think the very first year I went, it wasn't on Toronto Island, but then they moved it to there. That was one of the best run tournaments of anywhere of the time, just in terms of organization and in terms of how the players were treated. And because Toronto Island is already kind of a tourist thing, it always drew a great crowd. And then the city of Toronto is awesome. And so that was a highlight of the tournament series. All the years that I was on that tournament circuit, everybody wanted to go to Toronto. And Corey and Brian Roberts, the year that we won there in 78, man, I think that was their one and only time they came to that tournament. And they were just blown away at how cool Toronto was.
Wow. Right on.
It's a different place. I mean, it really is. It's of all the cities I've been to in North America, it's definitely more European, and more just, I don't know, it's not the same.
Yeah.
And it's great. It's awesome. I've never had a bad time in Toronto.
The only problem was you had every time you came up and won, you won this weird, funny metric money.
Yeah.
Metric money.
But in Rochester, in most places, if you throw in a Canadian quarter, they take it,
Yeah. Right.
Hey, you get close enough to the border, they might even take some of it at par.
Yeah.
Not really. But listen, we've kept you for a long time. We do appreciate your time. But before we go, we want to talk to you a bit about the terminology. And what's interesting to me is just the evolution and the historical timeline of the invention of the moves. And when did the nail delay come in? When did this come in? But Mace, maybe you can start us off with this. Some of the moves that look interesting.
So I mean, obviously somebody came up with all these moves. Do you remember who came up with a lot of these moves, like the flamingo?
It's really hard to know. The flamingo, I think I know who came up with the flamingo. There were two guys from Vancouver. Bill, I'm drawing a blank here. Bill, who was a dentist, and Bill King. Thank you. Right. Bill King and Jim Brown were a pair from Vancouver, and I believe they came up with the flamingo. I think it may have been Jim or Bill.
Okay.
And then that morphed quickly into the flamingitis, or the gitis, going around the other side of the leg, so to speak. And I'm not sure, but I think it came from that part of the world, the Northwest or the west coast of California. But again, because these tournaments were such pollinating events, someone shows up, does something. Sometimes these things would be invented at the same time. I'm convinced the nail delay was invented simultaneously in multiple places. Okay. The flawed, I believe Kevin Givens came up with that. It's like a triple fake catch here, only it's done down at your feet. And I think Kevin Givens may have been the one who came up with that. I think everybody is pretty, I shouldn't say this, but I think it was pretty well decided that Ken Westerfield was the first one to do body rolls.
Right.
Okay.
To be wrong on that, but my understanding at the time was that Ken started body rolls. And yeah, so I mean, things move very quickly like that. there's a whole body of catches now that because I've been out of the game
Right.
for a long time, that I wouldn't even begin to know how they call it. I think I sent you one picture of a catch I was doing, and I actually forgot the name of it, where you're making the catch through a hole that you're creating by holding your ankle, and catching behind your back through the triangle that's created there. I don't know if you have that there. There's a name for
That
that.
sounds like that sounds like something that's going to put me on my butt. I'm
Is
just
it
saying,
Yeah.
maybe
wait,
breaking something too.
is it this one?
Yes. I think
Okay.
that picture was taken in Seattle. And there's a name for that catch, and I can't even come up with it, and I'm doing it right there.
That's
The only name
amazing.
I can come up with is painful.
Yeah.
I don't think there was ever a time in my life that I could do that.
Yeah.
I mean, from a
So
flexibility standpoint,
That's
not from a
amazing.
pulling it off standpoint, but just like, yeah, I don't know.
one of the things that's happened over the years, and this is true with a lot of sports, as time goes on, better and better athletes come into it. And the kind of people that play freestyle now, they have a level of athleticism and also flexibility that may have been unknown in my time. And we had some, I mean, obviously we had some great players. I think a guy like Joey Hudocklin would be a top player in any era. But generally speaking, as time has gone on, it's the same with golf. I mean, goodness gracious, look at some of the athletes that play golf, Frisbee golf. These are people that could excel at a lot of sports, and they've chosen Frisbee golf because it appeals to them. And it's the same with freestyle. Some of these men and women, oh my gosh, some of the women, I mean, they're there are some of the players of my time that were ahead of the game. One woman's player in particular, Sue Straight. I think I sent you a picture of she and I at that 2016 event.
Well, that's who that
Uh,
is.
Sue was a ballerina at the time, and then she came into freestyle. And Sue brought things. She brought an element of artistry into freestyle that was. I guess you'd say it was really a cut above what was going on. I mean, women were playing, men were playing, they were making catches, they were doing hard things. But all of a sudden, Sue comes along, and the lines that she's cutting with the way in which she's positioning herself as she's going through her moves, or the way in which she is able to do spins where she stays exactly on an axis. She's not just throwing her body around, two or three times, but she's actually on an axis that is discernible and beautiful. People like her came into the sport and started to change the way people thought about freestyle. It's not just about making catches or doing hard stuff. It mattered how you looked. The aesthetic of it became more of a thing. That was something, by the way, that players like Donnie Rhodes. Donnie Rhodes is another one I would put in Sue's category of bringing a level of artistry into the appearance of freestyle, such that you would realize, wow, this is something that takes a high degree of skill to do. Corey Basso, Evan David, these are that I think brought that level of artistry into what people were watching at the time. And now I think there's even more of those kind of people in the sport that my frustration is I wish more people could see them play.
Yeah.
It
Well,
seems to me that Jim Palmieri and probably Hal Kurz with their gymnastics background probably fall into that same category, because I mean, like, I've seen some photos at Hal's house where Craze is doing a nail delay and Hal's hair is hanging down above the frisbee because he's upside down in a flip
Yeah.
in the midst of their routine as well. And it just, like, I think Crazy John Brooks is probably the person that I've seen do the most extensive freestyle anybody that I've seen. I haven't really gotten to see the things you're describing, except for at October Frizz, Crazy would almost always win golf, and his acceptance speech would usually be 30 to 40 minutes, and it was a whole routine, like Paul's intro combined with a freestyle routine that included brushing the teeth and the whole 9 yards. And I mean, he would go and go and go. And y'all both know him, so I mean, and he's that kind of a showman. And
he was a great performer.
yeah, and it still is. I mean, in a lot of different ways. And it just to see those kind of things, and like I've got a really vivid imagination. So as you're describing it, I'm thinking about what I've seen, the few things I've seen, and man, again, I find myself at the end of this episode wanting more, just like I did a couple weeks ago, over the last 8 weeks, with everybody talking about a frisbee instead of a golf disc. So I went and bought myself a Sky Styler and 2 Ultra Stars when I was out in Phoenix, and started instigating my guys here at my shop. I got 3 shop frisbees now, and we're going to go out in the yard next door and play catch every now and then. Why? Well, because we need to.
Yeah.
And it's just, again, it comes back to that common joy that we've all gotten in one way or another from these amazing plastic toys, that the origin goes back to the 50s. It's pretty amazing.
There was a saying, you probably heard it, but it kind of captures the joy you're talking about. And the saying was that when a ball dreams, it dreams it's a frisbee, because
Yeah.
a ball just falls to the ground, a frisbee flies,
Yeah.
and you can extend its life and all of that. And there was an awful lot of a worldview you could associate with Frisbee players that started out with the word freedom, being free to do things with the disc that no one maybe had ever done. And the lifestyle of the players at the time. I mean, it was a tour. People got together, traveled together, shared everything together, even if they were going to compete against each other on a given weekend. We all hung out together, and it was a great experience. I mean, those years were very important to me, and the people that I came to know during that time. If I met them today, it would be like no passage of time had even happened. That's the way I felt about a lot of the people I saw at that event in 2016.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a great time in the history of the sport.
Well, it certainly was
people
the
that
goal.
came from 2 different eras, I feel confident in speaking for Paul that we both had that same experience from the late 90s into the early 2000s. And it's just amazing to me that here's that common thread again and again and again, and you're talking about a time frame when I was, 7, 8, and 9 years old, and 20, 25 years later, I experienced exactly what you're talking about. It was just a little bit different activity.
I'm glad it's still going on like that.
Yeah. Well, the entire Frisbee world owes you a collective thank you. We, on behalf of the Good Times Hour, owe you a huge debt of gratitude for taking all this time. It's been well more than a Good Times Hour, but it's always hopefully good times. So we hope you had a good time with us.
Great time. It was great to know you guys and to have this conversation. Like I said, I think you're doing a very valuable historical stewardship, and I want to encourage you to keep doing it because people need to know.
Well, we appreciate it. We appreciate you being so free with the stories, told some great stories, and hopefully we spread a little light and a little knowledge as we spread the jam.
Great. Well, God bless you both.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dave. We really appreciate you stopping by, and it's again, thanks for spreading some more excitement around.
Yeah.
Sure. I look forward to seeing your future podcast.
Okay. Thank you.
Spread the word for us. Yeah. We're definitely going to keep this up.
Absolutely. In the meantime, be well, travel well, and good luck in everything you do down the road.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Dave.